It's a trap! What is up, dudes and lady dudes? Welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, I've got another discussion for you. This time, we're going to be talking about traps in the new current format. They're good. I mean, plain and simple, they're good. That's the whole basis of this video, is why traps now, more so than, I don't know, probably any point in the last, potentially even 2 whole years, are just at their best point. They're just at the best point they've been in as far as where they fit into the format, which is awesome because I think Konami's been trying to do this for a while. You know what I mean? They make cards like Evenly, they make cards like Impermanence, they make these trap cards that are just stronger and stronger and stronger, and they still can't, like, really find their way into a format. I guess like Impermanence, but Impermanence really isn't like a trap, you know? Neither is Evenly. So we just find ourselves in a really cool spot. So if you want to just break it down to the most basic terms as far as where traps fit into the format's slower, so traps are better. That's like the basic of it, but we're going to get a little more in depth on like why they're better, what specifically in the metagame is making them better, and why fundamentally how they're different from stuff like hand traps, and why it's potentially better to swap them in instead of hand traps for the time being. So moving on. First up is like just traps in general. Like what's the big problem with traps generally in formats is that they're too slow, right? So it's particularly going second in a format with like multiple going second, or not going second, going first, like combo decks that set up multiple negates. It's kind of a problem because you set cards into their negates. They don't have to waste any negates on that first turn. Next turn you're trying to disrupt them, and they're just like, I'll stop you from disrupting me. I'll stop that from disrupting me. I'll stop that from disrupting me. And then like you can't even touch them, and that's a big problem, right? So we've seen it, and also just the development that's made them a little bit better. It's just the development of certain stronger cards. Ice Dragon's Prison is a big one. I mean, this card is so strong. Non-targeting, non-destruction, disruption that also disrupts the graveyard as well as a monster on the field at the same time. Whoo! Nasty. And then we have stuff like Torrential Tribute that we've been seeing like over the last couple weeks, like slowly come back into the format. You're seeing like Shadal decks playing Torrential Tribute that actually are very strong in the format, which is very cool. Okay, so why traps weren't so good in the formats before is, like I said, there were these combo decks. You had Infernoble Knights, you had Dragon Link, these boards that are just going to end up with like 2 to 3 negates, and they might be hand looping you or doing something else degenerate at the same time. So it just was too much. It's too overwhelming. It's too fast for you to be able to combat with something like setting 2 to 4 back row. That's just not enough. It's not going to get the job done. But as we move into the new format, we see that the main combo deck is like Virtual World, and we'll talk about Drytron in a sec, but Virtual World was one of the key contenders coming out the gate, as we see Infernoble and Dragon Link kind of fall to the wayside after the ban list. And here's the big difference, is you might say, like, Virtual World's still a combo deck, John, it's still really fast at what it does. You're right, but the big difference is Virtual World wants to end on 1 to 2 True King of all Calamities, instead of multiple negations. So Calamities turns off monster effects, not spells and traps, which means all traps are free reign under Calamities. So they essentially just took all their turn, did a bunch of comboing off, all this crazy stuff, to essentially just land on 2 beaters in the face of a true trap-based deck. You don't care. Like, you just don't care about that. It doesn't really affect what you're trying to do. So you just, like, torrential their board when they try to extend for an OTK on the following turn. And if you had any other extra disruption, you probably just kept them from doing anything, to be honest, on that turn. And it's insanely strong. Now, there are still ways to lose. Chuche is still a really good card versus control-based decks just in general, but it's not particularly good versus traps. So today we're just talking about traps, so traps are just good versus this deck. Like, you're just not scared of Calamities. You do not mind setting 4 in the face of a Calamities. All you have to do from that point forward is try to keep them off of resolving Zeus, because Zeus is how they can equalize that kind of board state there. So just be wary of that. The new combo deck that is important to talk about, though, is Drytron, because this is a deck that could cause problems for trap-based decks, but it also depends on the type of version it is, because we see these versions that like to be like the Megalith version, so they have the potential to like pop multiple cards on your turn, which is pretty scary, because if they go first and set that up and you just try and set back row, they could just pop all your back row. So you don't even have any back row going into your opponent's next turn. They'll OTK you for sure. And even if they don't do the Megalith build, they're ending on something similar to, like, they probably go with, like, the, what is it, the Vanity's Ruler guy that just says you can't special summon. Again, that's not the biggest deal for our deck. It depends on what else they end on, because they also seem to attempt to end on something like a Herald of Ultimateness, which is just like an Omni Negate, as long as they have enough fairies in hand, which usually their combo results in then ending with multiple. So that's just multiple negations right there. So you'd need, as far as trap cards go, something specifically like Strike, like a strong trap and solemn strike at the same time, to be able to work around like the ultimateness and cause them troubles. But as far as Vanity's Ruler goes, the traps work well. It's the other disruptions that are problems, whether they Megalith quick ritual into a Bethor, or they just end on an ultimateness and just try and negate all your traps. Those are the more problematic cards that I would say. So it is a scary deck for sure, because you might need a specific trap like Solemn Strike to get you out of those pickles, or they're more degenerate cards that just like are multiple Omni Negates, as well as like a pop 3, pop 4 card is just too much. It's too overwhelming for traps. So this is a deck that could cause problems moving forward, but I don't think one deck in the format like this is really going to cause you to be like, oh, I can't play traps because Drytron's a deck. Maybe if Drytron is tier 0 and half the format is playing it, yeah, maybe you can't play traps, but I don't see it being that strong. I still think it's a strong deck, but we'll see. We'll see going forward. Now, next thing I want to talk about, that's kind of like why traps are better in the format. The format's just generally slower. We sell those multiple negation combo decks, move out of the format and move into stuff like Calamities. Drytron's still there, but everything else is really like not that fast, not that scary, in my opinion. And so what it makes you want to do is kind of lean off of hand traps. Now, the big difference between hand traps and traps is that I would say generally the basic answer is hand traps are much faster, but much weaker, and traps are much slower, but much stronger, higher ceiling cards. Like, there's no hand trap as strong as Ice Dragon's Prison. Maybe you could argue Nibiru's outcome is, but Nibiru has like different limitations in terms of when you can activate it. You have to wait a little bit, and if your opponent can get a negate, it could just be completely dead, right? So there are other restrictions there that trap cards generally don't have for the most part. And so like you look at something like Cyframe Gear Gamma versus like Solemn Strike, right? Like they generally do the same-ish thing, except Solemn Strike, you add the bonus of being able to just negate a summon altogether, not just monster effects. And then after that, you go and you look at like, okay, it's not as fast as Gamma, but as far as the effect goes, Gamma has the restriction of forcing you to have no monsters on field. And Strike pays 1,500. And honestly, I like to pay 1,500 more than having to limit myself from even being allowed to have any monsters on the field at all, or a Lambda. And so I like Strike for that reason more so in this format, because I'm just not scared of two people comboing off too hard. I'd rather play Strike than Gamma. Going first, I think it's stronger, more versatile as an interruption. And going second, it still is actually pretty decent if you open it with another card that is high ceiling impact on your opponent's turn. So I don't know. I think that's like a pretty good example of like trap versus hand trap. Just like I think the restrictions on this card really limit its ceiling and how strong it can be for you, whereas Strike is slower. But I think overall, as far as when it comes to them resolving, Strike is going to feel much better in a format like today's. And maybe Gamma's better versus something like Drytron, but that's Drytron specifically. And like I said, I'm not going to like overly compensate just for one good deck in the format, right? Like, it is what it is. If you run into that deck, it might be tough, but especially if you lose the die roll. But that's also like, you have to weigh the chances of 1, you run into that deck, and 2, you lose the die roll. You win the die roll, I'd rather have Strike than Gamma. Like, I don't know who wouldn't, right? So it's one of those things. It's just a weird balance of you know, really analyzing the format and doing what you think is best. And then I guess the last thing I want to mention here is like not just traps, like generic traps like Solemns, like Torrential Tribute, like Ice Dragon's Prison, but also traps that are actually part of engines in decks, because they have like a specific leg up on that. They're one, either searchable, so you don't have to just play hard copies of them and just hope you draw them. You actually have ways to get to them, which is really, really cool, or they just contribute to your overall engine as a whole. So Dynamiscus is one of those, but you're not really going to be searching it too often, but at least when you get it, you use it to disrupt your opponent, and then later in the duel, the next turn or two, it's going to come back as an extra body, which can allow you to get into extra Totally Awesome, to get you into some of the Paleozoic Exceeds, Link monsters, whatever you want, and that's pretty valuable. Also, you can tack on the fact, you can also tack on like other of these cards. You could say like some of the Shadal traps, Schism and Reshadal Incarnation, as well as something like Dogmatica. Punishment is a card that like helps them get back into their engine if they want, or get into a Shadal engine if they want. So there's some good stuff there. Eldritch is another big one. I mean, Eldritch is literally just like trap card in grave, set another trap. Trap card, activate that trap card. One turn later, banish that trap card, set another trap card. Like, that's how the deck works. It does go through some spells as well, but generally you're rotating the traps more often than not, and that makes the deck very tough to grind with for a lot of other decks. So I think these decks, these trap cards have a leg up on other traps, but I still think other really powerful traps like Ice Dragon's Prison, like Torrential Tribute, you've already talked about. Solemn Strike, I think, is really good right now. They're insanely strong, and I wouldn't blame you for just playing them, because you're just like, do I want to play this hand trap that's just kind of like, do I want to play something like Veiler or Ogre when I can play something like Solemn Strike? It just makes your board better going first, and going second, they're not even impactful enough to really feel like they're worth it. I think I might lean towards the trap. I think I might lean towards the Solemn or the Ice Dragon's Prison, just because you actually get that oomph, you get that power boost that you really need, and I'm really excited for that. It's been so long since traps have actually felt good. Not just like, oh, a specific one in a specific format, but like just good traps in general seem to be all over the place right now, and I love it. I honestly love it. So we'll see where the format goes from this. If Drytron becomes tier 0, everybody's playing it. Obviously, traps could fall back again, but you know, we'll obviously have to wait and see. You know how these format things go. Like 2 weeks later, the format could look completely different for no reason other than just people found out something. Nothing actually changed other than people just like figuring something out that they didn't know before, and then the whole format changes, right? So we'll see what happens there. I'm just excited that traps are good again. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. How do you feel about traps? Do you like? I think we can probably all agree that they're better than they've been in other formats, but what traps specifically you like right now, specific interactions of like strong traps that you think are like underrated and like should be noted as like how they're like interacting very strongly against a lot of the meta decks. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Other than that, thank you so much for watching this video, guys. Subscribe if you have not yet and you want to see more discussions like this one in the future, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.